Today on Market Journal, we all know about corn and soybeans, but pulse crops could be big business too. We'll tell you why. And burn, baby, burn. Who needs weed killer when you've got flames? See if this way of eliminating weeds would work for your fields. And when one type of livestock just won't cut it, some ranchers turn to multi-species grazing. Could this century-old way of pasture management be what your farm is looking for? This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could be with us for this special episode. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be bringing you some of our most popular stories. And starting the show, what do you know about pulse crops? They could include dried beans, chickpeas, or lentils, and are gaining more interest in both western and eastern regions of Nebraska. Extension Cropping Systems educator Strahinja Stepanovic says field peas can be double cropped with short-season soybeans, short-season corn, and grain sorghum, as well as forage crops and cover crops. We spoke with him to learn more about how Nebraska growers can incorporate pulse crops into their rotation.
Yeah, you were right. They're considered a staple crop in northern states, Montana and North Dakota, so Canada. There was a few guys that tried field peas, particularly 20 years ago in western Nebraska. Not having close proximity to our markets, trying to figure out how to fit them agronomically, how to grow them better, have a better yield stability, how to make them yield consistently was just a challenge. And for this year, I think one of the turn point in pulse crop industry in Nebraska is financial support from SARE, NCR-SARE, that supported this project to diversify crop rotations primarily in western Nebraska, but now we're coming further east just as we're getting more support from the end users. We're talking about pet food industry, we're talking about ingredients companies, we're talking about companies like Avalon that do field pea processing that have evaluated the product to a crop that we grow. We're talking about Redwood Group that just came from Mission, Kansas. We're talking about Farmers Business Network. And that's what makes this industry just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal group of people that want to connect directly to the grower, that are in direct communication with the consumers, that are making it easier for farmer to grow the crop and to market the crop.
Yeah, we've seen a big bump in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, it really seems to increase exponentially every year.
Yeah, acreage in the past 6 years have gone from 10,000 to 70,000 in Nebraska for field peas, and they're being consistently moving to the east. So we're trying to fit, like you heard from these younger guys, how they fit here. We're starting at the bottom level, trying to figure out what genetics work, what the yield we can get. We know there are certain benefits that come to it. If you plant a crop in March and you double crop it and you have a growing season from March to November, there's surely some benefits to it, especially if you're an organic farmer, lower inputs, not as much chemical inputs, better nutrient cycling so you don't have to fertilize your next crops as much, diversifying your rotations, opportunities like that. So we also had the winter wheat program today. We're talking about incorporating cool season grass and cool season broadleaf. This is what this cropping system needs, and in terms of agronomics, how are we going to fit that? If it doesn't work financially, in my opinion, it's not going to stay, and we're here to investigate that. But we're going to investigate from every standpoint. We're going to investigate it from the standpoint of what does that do to our bottom line in terms of dollars? What does that do to our soil? What does that do to our long-term sustainability? So that's our objective here.
It seems like finances are always a key. What are the biggest challenges you face when you're talking with farmers and growers about pulse crops?
First of all, I love challenges. And I know there's farmers that love challenge. they want to try something differently. And first thing that I run into is understanding that we're not growing corn and soybeans, that this is different, that the timing is more important. Planting on time, taking advantage of the opportunities that weather gives you. You know, in March, if you get rain or snow, you're not going to be able to get in a field for a couple of weeks. So take those couple days. You don't have to have too many acres, plant your peas. Wheat has different challenges than in western Nebraska. Disease management, fertilizer management, how do you get the protein up? It's just talking about education. How do we grow these crops here? They're not familiar with it, or they are, but they haven't tried them. Just try. You have a small acreage set aside, try these things. We can help you with finding the seed, finding the market, find recommendations, get into it, and try different things. It's people talk about incorporating cover crops in corn and soybean. Imagine incorporating cover crops, bringing livestock back to the ground. It's so easy with this having a cold season crops.
Pulse crops, definitely something you may want to look into for your operation. Moving on, and no matter what type of crop you have, many farmers look for ways to rid their fields of weeds without using chemicals. And one way to do that is to turn up the heat. Market Journal's Brad Mills introduces us to flaming and tells us if it could work for your operation.
No matter what type of field you have, battling weeds can cost you time and money, and really try your patience. Over the years, different products have been introduced to the market, but oftentimes the weeds will win out. According to Dr. Stevan Knezevic, a weed scientist with the University of Nebraska Department of Agronomy and Horticulture, 6 weed species have developed a resistance to Roundup, a common herbicide.
We've been using Roundup Ready technology for the last 20 years or so. And then over the years of overuse of Roundup and over relying on Roundup, we're seeing weeds just resisting Roundup. One of some of the latest cases are glyphosate-resistant Palmer pigweeds or Palmer amaranth.
Now many farmers are turning to flame weeding, or flaming. It's a method that in the past has been used primarily in organic agriculture.
Some of the issues that we have now with the dicamba technology, with this potential drift and everything, some of the farmers chose to actually go back and plant conventional beans, and some of them are actually interested in using flaming for weed control.
Knezevic helped patent a 4-row unit that he uses in his research, but notes that farmers can use a flaming kit the size of a backpack or look into a massive 8 and 12-row machines. Flaming uses a propane-fueled torch and can reach a temperature of up to 2,500 degrees. It will cost about $10 to $12 for an acre for one shot of flaming.
Flaming is done at least twice in the season. You can start off early by planting the crop, let the crop come up, let the weeds come up, and then you can do some rotary homing, you can do some cultivation, or you can do a first shot of flaming.
And with all this technology, it's important to understand your crops and how the flaming process works. Improper use could result in a severe loss of yields.
Depending on which crop you have, some crops are trickier than other. If you flame, for example, beans, you can kill the beans or you can hurt the beans pretty bad if you don't know what you're doing. Corn is all 3 corn types, and sorghum. These are grassy type crops that are pretty resilient to flaming. You can nip the leaves with the flame, but from the growing point, the new plant just going to keep going. In soybeans, if you nip the growing point of soybeans, then you're in trouble. So basically, and then you can come back later on when the plants have some height and everything and do a second shot of flaming.
Currently, the technology's biggest drawback is a lack of equipment for flaming to be the only source for weed control. But researchers see the method as having a strong potential.
What's the future? This year I had 67 organic guys. The weather, we have the spring times, which means you cannot go in with the mechanical means to remove the weeds. This might be one of the only alternatives. So basically that's the answer. What is the potential for that? It all depends what are the environmental conditions out there. But this definitely has a potential to be one of the tools in the toolbox.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Brad Mills.
The propane used in flaming is clean burning, non-toxic, and won't contaminate groundwater. The height and growing stage of weeds and crops affects the duration and method of applying the flame. So be sure to study up on flaming to see if it's right for you. Next, negotiation is a big part of everyday life, and on the farm it's no different. By thinking outside the box, negotiation has the potential to save on operation expenses. We spoke with Nebraska Extension's Austin Duerfeldt about the importance of knowing how and when to negotiate.
So negotiation is one of those things that not a lot of people necessarily have formal training on. And a lot of people look at it and say, well, I only buy a car once every 5 years. But the fact of the matter is, it's a little bit deeper than that. You go through and you start looking at it and you say, yeah, I buy equipment and I buy cars. I also negotiate my farm cash rent. And then you get to looking at it even further, and at times you're sitting there and you all of a sudden realize, I'm negotiating with my child as whether or not they should be eating their vegetables. I'm negotiating with my spouse and my family as where I want to eat tonight. If I want to go down 179 or if I want to go on Highway 75. Negotiation is a large part of everyday life, and I think it can benefit a lot of people just knowing a couple of tips and understanding what the process is.
Austin Duerfeldt is currently working on a new extension series of negotiation classes designed to provide helpful tips and tricks that one can use when negotiating.
Just the fact that it's part of everyday life, and since starting an extension as Southeast Educator, I've come to realize cash rent seems to be one of those hang-up points for a lot of people. As I get phone calls, everybody kind of wants to know what cash rent is going for as an average around the county that they're living in. I think they're kind of missing a key point to the whole process, and they're a little bit timid because they don't want to upset the other side. But understanding what the range that we're negotiating in and kind of what everybody's looking for, there's also the key is just the fact that a lot of times everybody gets hung up with the cash portion of it. How much do you want for me to cash rent this ground? But you're leaving a lot on the table with some other side notes, if you will, of things that could be negotiated with. One of the ones that I know I've come across before is somebody realized that they can't quite get the cash rent that the landowner wanted, but then they realized that they were leaving for Florida every winter. And so now all of a sudden there's this negotiation factor of, I can care for and watch after your house when you're down in Florida and you won't have to worry about that. And it's those non-monetary items of negotiation that some people are leaving on the table.
A method Austin recommends producers use while negotiating is the Ackerman bargaining method.
When you start talking about car purchases and big equipment, you start to run into something that's a little bit more hard-nosed than some of the other situations you look at. I put out an article on Crop Watch that talks about the Ackerman bargaining method. It's a lot more of figuring out what your target price is and trying to work your way. And then just as I was talking about non-monetary features, a lot of times what you'll run into is these dealerships, they'll come up with extended warranties or something that's cheap for them to offer but offers value to you, and you have to just understand kind of what that value is.
From applying the Ackerman bargaining method to learning how to communicate with all types of negotiators, Austin's goal is to make sure all are comfortable when negotiating.
Later this spring, we're hoping to hammer out the finalized details, and maybe late summer go ahead and start doing some programs and some seminars and try and make them a little bit more interactive, where you'd be given a scenario and you'd actually run through a negotiation process with somebody else. Crop Watch is a great resource. I'm trying to do Gold Star Negotiation. It's going to be a series. More places in terms of if you're wanting to find out more about negotiation. Harvard Law School actually has a great blog and series that you can subscribe to and find out some tips and tricks that, these are things that are being offered in courses for CEOs and high-powered companies, and they do a great job of trying to provide that resource.
Great advice right there. Moving on, and a farm management practice doesn't have to be new in order to be successful. Homesteaders from 100 years ago or more were using various species of livestock to keep their pastures in order and put food on the table for their families. Now, other ranchers are taking their lead and learning that livestock diversity can be key when it comes to maintaining a healthy farm. It's a concept that's as old as the farm itself. Multi-species grazing uses different animals to target different areas of your land, with the goal of making the best use of the pasture and the animals on it.
Greater than 90% of America's industry for a long time was agriculture. And so everybody had a little herd of pigs even, sheep and goats and cattle and all these different forms of protein for meat and for milk and for fur and for fiber. And so it's been a big part of agriculture as long as humanity has existed. It's only been in the past 100 years where people have been able to really focus on raising any one species.
Ranchers like Sage Askin see the benefits in relying on more than one type of livestock. He's been employing the idea of multi-species grazing for 4 years on ranches in Wyoming and Montana. He says the key to being successful is finding the right mix of animals and available forage.
The components of multi-species grazing, just at the most basic level, for us is that we have cattle that usually most people already have on a ranch. And then on the ranches that we lease, we might run cattle, and then we'll bring in sheep that will run before or after the cattle, sometimes with the cattle. And we also have goats if we have a browse component on that ranch. And so we just try to adapt the livestock to the resource, the forage resource that's available. So if there's a lot of browse, if there's a lot of brush and things like that, we start thinking more towards having some more goats on that operation.
The proper planning and understanding what different animals offer can pay off in terms of monetary gain and environmental sustainability.
The benefits of multi-species grazing for us have been twofold: ecological and economic benefits. On a pound-for-pound basis, meaning that for every pound of body weight of animal on the range, a little critter such as a sheep and a goat will be more profitable than a bigger critter such as a cow. Now, from an ecological perspective, the various forage base that's often available to us all across the United States has various components of browse plants and grazing plants. And so we believe that extensive use of just grazing plants, like with cattle, for year after year after year, creates a shrubland that is not being grazed or used in any way. So by browsing that back and with an equal mix of sheep and goats, we're able to get a very good pasture mix of species that actually fits the range. So it's a bottoms up, from the ground up approach to management on a ranch.
There's a lot to consider when deciding if multi-species grazing is right for you. You'll need to plan for extra fencing, additional vet care, security from predators, interspecies personality conflicts, and more.
There will be people that are antagonistic towards having sheep and goats who haven't just been used to it. It's not their own fault. And so that can be a disadvantage. Another disadvantage can be having to go out and find markets to sell those livestock that you might not be used to selling. As well, the environmental impacts. Both sheep and goats are a little tougher to winter, to carry through the winter in our tough, rugged Wyoming winters. And so that's a bit of a learning curve. Lastly, all of it is just a new thing. In essence, it requires a bit of a learning curve. Any new thing you do requires learning new ideas, new options, and that's probably the biggest thing. Is it's very challenging to learn something new.
If you'd like more information about multi-species grazing, Sage says that you can contact him through his website. The address is askinlandandlivestock.com. Next up, it can be easy to focus on the crops themselves and forget how important the soil underneath is. Market Journal spoke with University of Nebraska Extension soil scientist Dr. Charles Shapiro to learn how the understanding of different properties and different types of soil is key to proper soil management.
When we talk about physical properties and even the biological and chemical properties, the physical properties are basically the foundation and the structure on which soil exists. And so texture is the foundation of that structure. So it's very fundamental. If you know the texture of the soil, you can predict a number of other qualities, how much water the soil can hold, how much organic matter the soil can maintain. And so it doesn't tell us everything, because how the soil is managed and where it is in the geography build on that texture. But texture is just like whether you have a wood house or a brick house or a sandcastle. So that's what we consider the fundamental part of the physical properties. The soil texture triangle is set up so that we can have three major categories: clay, sand, and silt. And anywhere on the triangle, we can figure out the percent of clay or silt and sand. And it's a visual concept of how the different textures fit together. We have arbitrarily set up three major classes of particle size, and they have different properties, so there is logic and science behind it, but we have sand, silt, and clay. And so a soil is 100% something, and so it's going to be a certain division between sand, silt, and clay, and the triangle allows us to have everything add up to 100. And you can see when you look at the triangle, if you go from the lower left-hand side all the way up to the point or to the right, you'll see you go from sand to clay or sand to silt. And as scientists, we like to draw nice, neat lines and say, if you're 29%, you're one thing, and 30% you're another. But in reality, those lines are a lot more vague. But it gives a farmer and somebody some way of communicating. Like if you called me on the phone and you said, I have this and this problem, I'll probably say, what kind of soil do you have? And then you may or may not know. A farmer might just say it's gumbo or something, and then I have to deconstruct it. But that gives me an idea of other questions to ask. So it's the entry point. What I have actually in my hand is just a rod. And they use this actually out west. You could see there's a little ball on the end. And in the western part of the state, they use this to find where the soil moisture is, because in wheat country, and this is wheat that we're standing in, we don't have as much wheat here in the eastern part of the state, but they could go out in the field and push this down, and then when they hit dry ground, they know. And if you're going into the season and you only have this much moisture, that's a different plan than if you have a full profile. What I'm going to use it for today is not really to find out where the moisture is, but where the compacted layers are. And we're standing on the surface, and you could dig down with your trowel or something and find out what the first inch or two is, but it's really hard to get down to 2 or 3 feet. And here, it goes down all the way. If we were on some area where there was wheel tracks, it would stop at a certain distance. So something like this, it doesn't have a dial. We do have ones with dials, but a practitioner could get pretty good at just using it. You have one set of strength, I have another. So when you're pushing harder. You don't know what the PSI is, but you would know that you had a oomph into it. And that'll change. If you go on to a very dry soil, it's going to have a different amount of oomph. Now, we don't really know what's causing it to stop. It could be dry soil or it could be compacted. And then I would take a shovel or a spade and I could dig around that hole, and we can look and investigate further. Nebraskans are very lucky that they have deep soils, but if you go to another part of the country or the world, you might hit bedrock at 6 inches, in which case, you don't need a big rod like this. But, so it gives you some more information. But what we're wanting to do is find if there's a compressed layer, because if the soil's compressed, the roots won't be able to penetrate, and water may be harder to get through, and, there's a cycle of bad things that happens.
Thanks, Charles. For our final story today, according to Brian Kuehl, Executive Director of Farmers for Free Trade, 20% of farm revenue comes from farm exports. Farmers for Free Trade is an organization that allows farmers to have a voice in supporting free trade, and the nonprofit organization has online tools that allow farmers to communicate on why free trade is important for their operation.
Farmers for Free Trade is a bipartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to helping farmers give their voice in support of free trade. We were founded last year with the support of the American Farm Bureau Federation, National Corn Growers Association, National Pork Producers Council, and many other ag organizations, really to help coordinate between ag organizations and with farmers across the country speaking out in support of free trade.
According to Brian, Farmers for Free Trade is working on reaching out to their audience through multiple marketing ways.
Farmers for Free Trade has been doing a lot of activities around the country to try to build support for trade. We've been going out, talking with farmers at ag conventions, distributing these ridiculously large buttons in support of free trade, which actually Governor Ricketts wore one last night, and we were very pleased with that. We've been giving out bumper stickers that say, "I'm a farmer for free trade," and we've been having people sign banners that say, "I'm a farmer for free trade." All ways, very simple ways that farmers can show their support for trade.
So, why should farmers support this organization? According to Brian, 20% of the farm revenue comes from ag exports.
So when you think about that, if we're not shipping our products overseas, we're getting nowhere as an industry. Think about it this way. There are a lot more mouths outside the United States than there are inside the United States, and we grow food, or we grow feed that goes into animals. It's critically important that we're able to ship that food and those commodities outside the U.S.
To further inform producers about the importance of trade, Farmers for Free Trade just launched their Voice of the Farmer campaign.
One of the things Farmers for Free Trade is doing is today we are launching our Voice of the Farmer campaign, which is an exciting campaign. We have radio and television spots going up nationwide talking about the importance of trade to U.S. agriculture. Those spots feature a fourth-generation farmer from Montana talking about her grain and her livestock and where they're exported. And we're also giving farmers an opportunity to engage directly in this topic. So if farmers go to farmersforfreetrade.com, they can film their own short 30-second video talking about where they're from, what they grow, and why trade's important to them. Those little video snippets then we'll put up on social media, we'll share with elected officials. We'll just really use to build a drumbeat of support in U.S. agriculture for trade.
We also asked Brian where producers can find more information about Farmers for Free Trade.
Farmers can go to farmersforfreetrade.com. We also have a Give $20 for Trade campaign. So if you want to make a small donation to support our efforts, we'll use that money to put the message out on ag radio that trade is important. So important for Nebraska, so important for America. So really encourage people to support Farmers for Free Trade.
And we'd like to thank all of our guests who took part in today's show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.